The dust of the military base was still in my lungs when the transport truck dropped me off at the end of my street. I had spent 9 grueling months deployed overseas, counting down every single second until I could hold my 4-year-old daughter, Lily, in my arms again. My husband, Mark, had been unusually distant over the phone during the last few weeks of my deployment, often claiming that Lily was asleep or that his phone reception was bad whenever I asked to FaceTime her. I had brushed it off as the stress of him being a temporary single parent, but as I walked up the driveway of our suburban home, a cold knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. The house was completely dark. I pulled out my keys, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside, expecting to smell dinner or hear the familiar sound of Lily's cartoons playing in the living room. Instead, the house felt entirely empty, stripped of life. I dropped my heavy duffel bag onto the floor and hurried up the stairs to Lily's bedroom. When I pushed the door open, my breath caught in my throat. Her bed was stripped bare. Her toy chests were wide open and completely empty. Her favorite stuffed animals, her clothes, her books, everything was gone. Panicking, I ran into the master bedroom. Mark's closet was cleared out. He hadn't just gone out for groceries, he had packed up and left. My heart was pounding frantically against my ribs as I grabbed my phone to call him, but before I could dial, my eyes caught sight of a thick white envelope sitting neatly on the center of the bed. Written across the front in Mark's sharp handwriting was my name. I tore the envelope open, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the papers inside. It wasn't a standard note. It was a formal legal document, a custody petition, and stapled right behind it was a certified DNA paternity report. According to the official-looking document from a prominent local laboratory, there was a 0% probability that I was Lily's biological mother. The papers claimed that Lily had been switched at birth, or that I had illegally brought her into the country, branding me an unfit guardian. A separate letter from Mark's lawyer stated that based on this medical evidence, an emergency custody order had been granted, and Mark had relocated Lily to an undisclosed location for her own protection. I stood there in the quiet bedroom, staring at the paper, momentarily losing the ability to breathe. It was mathematically and biologically impossible. I had carried Lily for 9 months. I had given birth to her in a military hospital with Mark holding my hand. The sheer absurdity of the accusation was terrifying, but the official legal stamps on the document made it dangerously real. Mark hadn't just thrown a tantrum, he had weaponized the legal system against me while I was deployed overseas serving my country. He had used a completely fabricated, fraudulent DNA test to legally kidnap my daughter. I didn't waste a single second crying. The military had trained me to lock down my emotions and focus entirely on the mission, and right now, my only mission was getting my daughter back. I grabbed the fraudulent paperwork, rushed out of the house, and drove straight to the police station. But when I showed the desk sergeant the documents, he simply sighed and shook his head. He told me that because there was an active, signed court order based on a certified medical laboratory report, it was treated as a civil custody dispute, not a kidnapping. They couldn't intervene unless a judge overturned the order. Realizing the local system was stacked against me, I called my military legal counsel and hired the fiercest family lawyer in the city using my deployment savings. By the next morning, we discovered the fatal flaw in Mark's desperate plan. He had used a cheap, corrupt private lab and paid a technician under the table to forge the documentation, completely unaware that Lily's actual birth records and genetic profile were securely locked inside a federal military hospital database from the day she was born. We filed an emergency motion for fraud, demanding an immediate court hearing and a mandatory, court-ordered DNA test to be performed at an independent state facility. Mark was forced to appear in court 3 days later, looking smug as he sat next to his lawyer, convinced his fabricated story would hold up. He hadn't expected me to fight back with the full weight of federal records. When the judge reviewed the authenticated birth certificates from the military hospital, alongside the undeniable results of the new, court-administered DNA test proving a perfect 100% match, the atmosphere in the courtroom turned ice cold. The judge looked at the fraudulent papers Mark had submitted, then looked down at Mark with absolute disgust. The judge didn't just dismiss Mark's emergency custody order, she immediately stripped him of all parental rights, awarded me sole legal and physical custody of Lily, and ordered the bailiffs to detain Mark on the spot for perjury, forgery, and grand fraud. I watched in silence as the handcuffs clicked around the wrists of the man I used to trust, his smug expression completely melting into utter terror as he was led away to a holding cell. An hour later, social services delivered Lily to the courthouse. The moment the doors opened and she saw me standing there, she let out a little sob and sprinted across the hallway, throwing her small arms tightly around my neck. Holding her against my chest, smelling the familiar scent of her hair, the cold armor I had worn since arriving home finally shattered, and the tears fell freely. Mark had tried to use my absence and a web of forged lies to erase me from my daughter's life, but he had severely underestimated the resolve of a mother who fights for her child. I carried Lily out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun, knowing that nobody would ever be able to take her away from me again.